Hi everybody, this is Pam, the art teacher at Synergy School, checking in with you today to show you some techniques to use with black Sharpie that you might want to try in class. So there's different kinds. This here is the chisel tip, and we have the fine point and the extra fine point. Mainly I like to work with the fine point because this is very versatile, but I'll get to the others as well. You also want to think about what kind of paper you're using. This paper I have here is very, very thin. It's newsprint. So if I'm going to do a drawing on this, one of the problems with working with Sharpie is that it will bleed through the paper. So depending on what you're doing, and sometimes it will bleed all the way through, you might not want to use something so thin, so I have a thicker drawing paper here. So these points get different kinds of lines. This is the chisel point. We'll get a nice thick line. It's a little dry. This is the fine point, thinner lines, and then the extra fine. So what I'm going to show you is how you can make your drawing look 3D using Sharpie. And there are a couple ways to do it. One way is to learn how you can shade with a fine point Sharpie. One way of shading is to do what's called hatching. So hatching works by how thick the lines are and how close together you put them. So if I want to have hatching that's darker, I would put them closer together like that. There's also cross hatching, which would look this way, and then going across like this. The closer together the lines are, and the thicker the lines, the darker it will be. So for example, if I want to draw a cube, and the light source is coming from here, it's going to be really light at the top. It'll be a little bit shaded on this side, and it might be a lot darker on this side. So maybe I would cross hatch there. So it gives it a little bit of shading, and then maybe there's a shadow that comes out this way, and maybe that gets fully filled in. So another example is, instead of cross-hatching and hatching, would be to use what's called stippling. So if I want to make this circle into a sphere, stippling is drawing lots of little tiny dots. The closer together they are, the darker the shading will be. It's a time-consuming process, especially if you want to have something be very dark in an area. This is easier done with a thicker Sharpie than a thin Sharpie, but then it depends on what you're creating. Maybe there's a shadow here. I'm thinking the light sources right here. So that's an example of shading with stippling. So if you look at my little worksheet that I have for you, so it's showing cross-hatching from light to dark. You can see how close together and fine these lines are. Hatching from light to dark, and stippling from light to dark. And then finally, if you really work at it and really take your time, here's an example of a drawing done just with Sharpie. So there are places in here where it's completely filled in solid, areas where there's cross-hatching, areas where there's just hatching, and you can really model something to be 3D if you take your time with it. It is permanent, you can't erase, so you have to plan ahead, maybe sketch ahead, and then do your Sharpie on top of your pencil and erase the pencil marks later. But it's so graphic and so strong looking, especially on a piece of white paper. You'll really make a good impression if you use Sharpie in your art pieces. So that's just an example for you. Have fun creating, and I'll see you later.